Now, let's get an expert's take on this weekend's meeting in Sweden between working-level officials of North Korea and the United States on the regime's denuclearization. I'm glad to say we are joined on Skype by Dr. Mark P. Barry, an independent Asian affairs analyst who has followed U.S. North Korea relations for nearly 30 years now. So, Mark, I'd like to start by asking, these two sides, the U.S. and North Korea, haven't sat down since the Hanoi summit collapsed with no deal around 8 months ago now. Given that this is their first face-to-face since February, what are your expectations for these discussions in Sweden?
Well, we expect them, Mark, to meet for about a day, day and a half. Obviously, nothing's going to be solved in a day or a day and a half, but if they meet weekly or every 10 days and they continue that process, which was kind of the pattern of the talks that began in 1993 in Geneva, under the Clinton administration, where there were regular meetings that went all the way on through the agreed framework of October '94, then you can see some fruitful product. But I think it would be absolutely incorrect to have expectations that everything will be solved in 1 or 2 meetings. But the fact that it's the foreign ministry in North Korea that's leading the negotiations this time, and the fact that the U.S. side has a new national security advisor, then I think that there's a much hopeful sign for progress.
Now, as you touched upon briefly there, things really have changed quite a lot since Hanoi. President Trump has floated this new method of moving forward. Like you say, John Bolton is out of the White House. Kim Yong-chol is no longer the head of the North's delegation. And we are edging ever closer to the 2020 U.S. presidential election. So Trump really wants a big foreign policy win that he can sell to voters. Do these factors mean the U.S. will provide the flexibility North Korea has been demanding from Washington for so long now?
Well, it's going to be a rough negotiation. If the media reports are even largely correct that the U.S. is prepared to allow 3 years of sanctions lifted on the exports of North Korean textiles and coal in exchange for the freezing and closure of Yongbyon nuclear facility and possibly something else, that may be seen by the North as a lopsided bargain. That's why it's going to be a hard-nosed negotiation. And if I were President Trump, I'd be hoping for some meeting this year, but it may not be possible because the North will dig in its heels and make the U.S. pay a greater price than perhaps it's expecting. But nonetheless, this is the way to make progress, but it has to be a lot of really careful and considerate bargaining without either side giving up.
Well, yes, talks are better than no talks at all. Now, many were really surprised when North Korea launched a ballistic missile just days ahead of this meeting in Sweden. As we know with North Korea, the timing of these launches are never a coincidence. Why do you think the regime pulled this potentially risky move so close to these talks?
There are multiple reasons, but the most important reason is not only to gain leverage, but it's a sign that North Korea cannot be mistreated. So it's always about the prestige of the state and the fact that they want to be seen and dealt with by the United States almost as equals, even though there's such a huge disparity between both countries. So the firing of such a missile, with its potential lethality, certainly upon the entire Japanese nation, is a very, very strong signal for Northeast Asia. And it's their way of saying to the United States, you have to take us seriously, you cannot mistreat us, and you cannot ignore us. So to me, that's a not inconsistent message with how North Korea has been bargaining with the U.S. since the early 1990s. It's not a bad sign, but I think it is a byproduct of the unfortunate events since Hanoi, including a lot of misreading of each other's intentions in the month of August.
Now, before we let you go, do you expect Kim Jong-un and President Trump to hold a third summit soon? And if so, when do you think it'll happen and where? And also, do you think there's any chance at all of Kim heading to the United States or Trump going the other way?
I think Kim wants to have it in Pyongyang, and of course he'd be happy to have it by the end of the year. We don't know if there's a next year. Kim has been very clear in his own words that really something has to be settled by the end of the year. So I do think that's North Korea's deadline. Otherwise, they may pull some interesting stunts that will be very upsetting to the United States and its allies. On the other hand, President Trump, maybe the most he can do is invite Kim to Honolulu. But Trump would prefer a third country. I don't think Kim wants to go to any country where he could be sent home unexpectedly. Certainly not Mongolia. And if he were to go to anywhere in Europe, whether it's Stockholm or Geneva, the reality is that he could still be sent packing, but have to take an Air China flight back home, which would be even more embarrassing. If I were Kim, I would want it in Pyongyang, and President Trump may find that he has to relent to that, but it all depends on what kind of deal he can sign, and that's always the million-dollar question. What kind of a deal does President Trump have and that he can politically accept in order to use that to buttress his campaign into 2020?
Well, seeing President Trump in Pyongyang would be quite something, but I suppose with the way things have been developing over the past year or 18 months, you can never second-guess anything these days.
You never know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you very much for your perspective. We always appreciate your insights.
You're quite welcome.
Yeah, and we'll see how this weekend unfolds, and hopefully we'll invite you back for a breakdown of how these talks went. That was Dr. Mark P. Barry. Thank you ever so much for joining us.
Sure.